And welcome to the B side, where we talk about Band of Brothers shit that's not necessarily the episodes. And today we're back with Derek. He's returning for another historical episode. We appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
Today we
Happy to
just
be
want,
here.
thank you, and we just wanted to talk about more. Last time we had him on, we just talked about more training and the types of training they had to go through and how that led to other things. And today we just wanted to talk more about World War II questions in general that we had or that were brought up because of watching the episodes themselves of Band of Brothers. Um, we brought him back. He was Uncle Derek's been great to come back again and help us out. So I think we can get started here. I think just real basic here, Uncle D. Did the Germans create their own paratroopers?
They did actually. So in German, they were called Fallschirmjägers, which was the paratroop unit. Right. So, you want to take a guess where they got the inspiration from?
Uh,
What army?
I have no idea.
Anybody know? Anybody know who the Germans worked with in the interwar period to rebuild the German army? It's your trivia question for the day.
Come on, AJ, you got this.
The Soviet Union.
Ah,
Okay.
They actually
well, yeah.
had a tank school and an air and an aviation school in the Soviet Union. And they noticed that the Soviets, I think the first successful, it was a training, it wasn't a mission, but first successful paratroop drop was in like 1922. It was the Soviet Army did it, and the Germans were there and saw some of it. Some of the Germans were, and so they got inspired by the Soviets and said, "Hey, we need to develop this ourselves." Like the Americans, they kind of just let it go for a while, but then later in the 30s, then they put a guy named Kurt Student in charge of it, and he built the Fallschirmjägers. And so they were using them. The first time they deployed them in battle was in 1940 campaign. So Denmark and Norway, they used paratroopers, and then some of them were in France as well, and then they use them thereafter. So
Oh, were they pretty widely used, kind of like the Americans were, or was it more like specific drops here and there?
they were pretty widely used for a while because they use them in the Mediterranean too. Like there's a lot of like they took the island of Crete with paratroopers. So a lot of the islands in the Mediterranean they could do with that.
Like I said, because
Um,
like I said, the mountains and islands and all that kind of stuff. Like I said, it's just places you're
right,
not going to get the vehicles they had at the time.
right,
I don't
right,
know if they had the
absolutely.
same issues we had with, like, when they drop paratroopers, did they get scattered around everywhere, or were they better at it than we were at
Um,
here?
I don't know, like, if their success rate, how that compares to the US. I would imagine it's pretty similar. I don't know how you can, unless you got a nice clear day with no anybody shooting at you. I don't know how you could drop all these guys without ending up with the same issues. But I don't know. I don't know for a fact how good the Germans got at it. I mean, they had really successful paratroop units, but like the Americans did.
Well, if I'm going to jump out of a plane, I would prefer it to be on a nice clear day with nobody shooting at me.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. I concur.
so in one of our episodes, I can't remember which episode that is, where they AJ, you may remember the Market Garden episode. Is that 3 or 4?
I believe it's three.
3. Episode 3 is a lot about Operation Market Garden, and we had a conversation about it on that episode. How Montgomery, the guy that came up with Market Garden, didn't properly get it approved. He told some lies, and obviously Market Garden was not successful. Were there what we really wanted to know was there consequences for him for essentially putting a plan in place that was not approved?
No, there was not. He doesn't suffer any consequences of that. So two angles. One, he does redeem himself later on. I mean, his command of troops at the Battle of the Bulge, and then later, I think it's in the crossing of the Rhine that he plans and engineers. Were both done well, and they just sort of, you know, that was his redemption. Keep in mind the politics of it, though. I mean, Montgomery's by that point one of the highest ranking British generals that's working with the U.S. Politically, probably not a good idea. I mean, Eisenhower did sign off on it. And so later, when asked, he just said, "Yes, I signed off on it." And that's all he would say about it. So I think it was probably political to say,
Yeah, I'll say it's
yeah,
less is more type thing, to where like, yeah, it's
yeah,
overdone with, whatever. Like, just downplay it.
yeah.
I can see that.
But make no mistake, Bernard Montgomery was a pain in the ass. Even the British didn't like him. Right. My favorite Montgomery story was after the Battle of El Alamein, which he won. He invited the German general Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma to come have dinner with him afterwards, which actually wasn't that unusual. Right? Oh, the press found out, and so the British press ran to Churchill and said, "Can you believe that Montgomery's having dinner with a German general?" And Churchill said, "Yeah, poor von Thoma. I too have had dinner with Montgomery."
That sounds like something Churchill would say. Like, that man was always good for a good comeback. Love
He
that.
was very witty. So
Yeah.
anyway,
I
but yeah, I
suppose.
think it's political. I mean, plus when you get to that, you got that many stars on your chest, they don't.
Yeah,
It's harder
at
to.
that point,
There was
who's
guys
gonna
that get
question
fired in
you?
World War II, but he's too high ranking, I think, for that to fall on him. So
Well, I asked you that one. We had three main, like, I don't know if you want to call them sticking points, where we got bogged down in conversation about like something that went on. The market garden question was obviously one of those. We had two more, and I'll just ask them back to back to back. The next one was in episode 2. Spears essentially just mows down a bunch of POWs because they said they couldn't travel with them, so they just kill them. A bunch of unarmed guys. How common was that during this World War II and or with the airborne specifically, if you know?
um, that is a great question, and I don't think anybody knows.
Mm.
So technically, you're not a prisoner of war until your name has been reported to the authorities, like you've been
Ah,
actually received as a POW, recorded, and then it gets reported International Committee of the Red Cross, and then that notification goes to the other side, and then so now if I'm the American Army, I know that these 100 guys are not prisoners of war. But that gap in between, what you're talking about,
yeah.
that moment from initial capture to when you're actually officially reported, there were, I'm sure,
Yeah.
thousands of guys that were shot.
Some ambiguity there. Like,
Yes,
yes.
exactly. Because nobody knows that you've been captured yet, and it's easy to just shoot you and lie about it later and say, "Hey, they fought to the bitter end, and we had to kill them."
Well, and really, especially if you're the 101st, you're behind enemy lines. You have a special mission. You're not exactly there to take prisoners and all that. Like, it's pretty
Right.
much, I just gotta kill you because I can't let you go and tell on me. Or like, it's like even if you like surrender and all that, it's like I still can't, man. Like, yeah. So
Right.
I could get that gray area.
Yeah. I
It's-
mean, it's both, as you say, right? I mean, if you're on a mission like that, what are you going to do with them?
Yeah, like
Right.
you're really gonna hope they keep their mouth shut the whole time, and like, yeah, it's just not.
Right.
Yeah, it's just not feasible.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, I'm not saying that justifies killing people that have surrendered, but I'm sure it happens quite a bit. And again, once they're registered prisoners, then we can track it because then you can get death rates as to which prisoners suffered
Yeah.
the most under whose captivity and all that kind of stuff. But that gray period that you're talking about, there's lots of stories, but it's very difficult to ever prove
Yeah.
any of that stuff.
Well, there's the second part to the same question, I guess, is we don't see it in the show and they don't talk about it really, other than there's this rumor that Spears also killed a sergeant who was on duty drunk. Well, first off, is that something that happened? Not necessarily with Spears, but with people? And was that something that you could legally do? Like if you were on shift drunk, could they kill you for that?
No, they don't. So the U.S. Army executes almost no one in World War II. It's a very small number. I think there were 100 and less than 150 U.S. troops that were executed by the U.S. Army in World War II. Right, and overwhelmingly those were for murder or rape or both.
Mm.
Right? One guy was shot for desertion, but that was a really special case.
Mm.
But everybody else, they'd actually committed like
Actual
civilian
crimes.
crimes in Europe, and they executed them for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of threatening to kill people in the show. Like Sink threatens to kill a whole group of them at one point. He doesn't, obviously, but he threatens it. And then there's another point where they threaten to kill one of the other sergeants for bad mouthing an officer essentially. Um, so I mean, there's times where they threaten it, but we don't see it. Um,
Yeah.
so we just kind of wondered about that.
Again, it's one of those things. I'm sure there was occasions when somebody may have done that and gotten away with it, because depends on who's watching or not watching.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But as a record, I mean, there was of course lots of alcohol use in World War II all the way around, and I don't think they ever. I might have just you might have got smacked upside the head or sent to the rear or whatever, or punished in some other way. But they're not shooting people for that. So at least not in the American Army.
Gotcha. The other big sticking point we had, where we talked quite a bit about it. So, in Bastogne, they're entrenched there, taking heavy casualties and, artillery and just freezing to death and all sorts of awful
Right.
things happening to them while they're in Bastogne. And then they talk about it, in multiple different ways, but essentially that Patton rescued them. Of course, the 101st does not recognize that. We were never rescued. We didn't need rescued. But Patton rescued them. But then the only 60 men that were left, of the 140 that showed up, only 60 of them were still alive, are sent to take Foy by themselves. Where was Patton? Where was the replacements? Where were more soldiers that Patton was supposed to be able to provide?
From what I understand, Patton went on, so he is actually on a spearhead that's moving east into Germany, and so I think Patton comes up to try to break the encirclement of Bastogne and then continues on. So I don't think he had already moved beyond where Foy was. I don't know exactly why they don't have more forces to help with that, other than the fact that they were already there in that spot in the line and chose to just continue on with them. I mean, one thing to think about is the U.S. actually doesn't have. I think the U.S. actually or the Allies anyway, were actually outnumbered on the Western Front by the Germans. The U.S. doesn't actually send that many comparatively. I think the U.S. had a total of like 90 divisions in World War II, and of course, a chunk of those are at least I think there were 22 that were in the Pacific. And then there are a few other places as well. So the U.S. doesn't actually they're short of forces sometimes, and so they have to use whatever they can. So I don't know specifically why they just said send the remainder of this group forward to take this position without more help. But I would guess it's because they're already moved thin. I mean, they lost quite a bit. I think what the casualties from the Battle of the Bulge is like 20,000 casualties, something like that. It was a big hit, and so they're struggling to kind of piece that line back together.
Okay, fair enough. We're talking about the Battle of the Bulge, and talking about the German advance. That battle or any other battles, what would you say is the turning point in stopping the German advance?
I would say most of these, like battle wise, are probably on the Eastern Front. Stalingrad for number one, and then probably Kursk number two. Stalingrad was the first time the Soviets had turned the Germans back, or actually they get 200,000 members of the German Sixth Army to surrender, and so they've stop the advance there and then begin to move back a little bit. And then Kursk, which was only a few months later, July of 43, was the first time the Soviet army actually beat the German army. So the Germans are still coming with blitzkrieg, and the Soviets had built their defense in depth that went back like 30 miles of tank traps, and the Germans couldn't get through it. And so that's when the first time the Soviets actually beat them tactically on the battlefield. And then, I mean, yes, they got them to surrender, but they had encircled them in Stalingrad. But it's not quite the same. But actually, just on head-to-head on a battlefield, Kursk was the first time they'd beat them. And then they began moving back to the west after Kursk. I mean, in the west, I would say one of the most important things was actually the Battle of the Atlantic, because the German U-boats were wreaking havoc on American shipping, both naval and merchant shipping, until the May of 43, when the balance tips because of some new weapons that come in, like the Hedgehog, which was like a big claw full of depth charges, and they would just fling this thing forward, and it would throw dozens of depth charges in the water, and they would come down like raindrops, right? And they would basically encircle submarines and then detonate and take them out. And that's the May of 43, I think, is the first month in which the Germans lost more subs than they took out Allied ships. Something like that. That may be off, but it's like that's when it switched. And after that, then they're still going to sink American shipping, but it flips the other way, and there's just tons and tons of American and British ships that get across the Atlantic after that weren't making it before. So, in my opinion, those are probably the things. If you're looking for turning points, I would say Battle of the Atlantic, because it secured a supply lines of communication for the Allies from the United States to Europe. And then the other two, because, I mean, again, you think about it, it's like 2/3 of all German casualties occurred on the Eastern Front. And so, it's Russia, where, European armies go to die, right? Napoleon, the Nazis,
Yeah,
it's cold and nasty out there. And so don't go. Don't go. It's my advice. No.
Well, to kind of combine the two there, I guess, the German advance plus the Battle of the Bulge, like what impact did the Battle of the Bulge have on the German plans?
I think the Battle of the Bulge is just a last desperate attempt to try to break through and push the Western Allies back. Keep in mind, by that point, so this is December of 1944. The Soviet army is about a month away from entering Germany in the east, because I think by mid-January the Soviet army is coming in the far reaches of the German Reich. So what's now what would be like now modern Poland, parts of that, right? And so they're trying to do whatever they can to try to turn the tide in the West. So yeah, you can trace on the German side. I mean, it is a big loss of morale. They do take like 80 to 100,000 casualties. And obviously they surrender, 5 months later, 4 months later. So it's a hit, but I think it was, to me, it seems like a last dying gasp to try to do something. I mean, on the American side, obviously it's casualty producing, and it delayed the American advance by about 6 weeks, because it's the end of January, I think, before the U.S. can get back to the lines they'd originally held on the 16th of December when the Germans first attack. So it does delay the American advance, and again, it causes thousands of casualties. But I don't think it changes by that point, it's almost inevitable. I mean, the Allies are advancing and had been for a while, and the Germans are running out of steam. So
the war was all but over.
yeah, I think everybody saw it by then. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and this is an opinion question, so I hope you're comfortable with that. But in your opinion, what do you think was like the most futile battles that the Allies had to fight during this time?
I do have an opinion on that.
Okay.
I actually have an article that I'm working on publishing about one of them. I think a lot of the futile battles were in the Pacific. I think a lot of the island, maybe not a lot. I mean, it's too strong a word. I think a certain number of the island campaigns that the U.S. fights in the Pacific were unnecessary. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out how much of that they could have figured out before they actually engaged in them. So what I did, for different reasons, I worked on a project on like the Battle of Peleliu and the Palau Islands, and my argument is that they could have completely bypassed Peleliu and it wouldn't have hurt them, wouldn't have affected the U.S. campaign at all. And I think they could have figured that out. And I'm not blaming anybody or trying to judge anybody, Monday morning quarterback. I'm just trying to ask, like, are there ways that you could see these things in advance? Like, how do you determine that? And I think there's things. Granted, they're in the middle of the war. Again, I'm not passing judgment on anybody, but I think in hindsight, that was a campaign that could have been bypassed. Another one was Iwo Jima. Actually, there was an article already written about that by, I can't remember the historian's name, that he says Iwo Jima was unnecessary also for the same reasons. So,
okay.
Well, it was just this feeling like we can't leave Japanese troops stuck on this island. Like, they might come out and get us as we go past them, but they don't have any way to project power off those islands because we destroyed all their planes.
That's what I was gonna say. That's the funny thing is, like, because I remember like hearing stories about like the Japanese soldiers being left on islands and not knowing the war's over and stuff like that. Right. You're just still there on patrol, thinking that you're fighting for like Hirohito and all them. Like, Like,
Well,
The last Japanese soldier surrendered in 1974.
What?
Yeah,
to
it's
to
almost
the
2 decades
end.
after the war ended. He was
Yeah.
outside. He was in the
Holy
Philippines.
crap!
He
It's like
lived in a cave by himself.
by then the world moved on to Vietnam. Like
Yeah.
it's
Oh my
just
God, yeah.
like yeah,
Yeah.
like we've already went to Korea and Vietnam actually. Like
Jeez.
Yeah. They had to go to get his commander, who was still alive
that
in
yeah,
Japan, and bring
that's
him to the
probably what I'm hearing.
Philippines.
Yeah, to where like they had to actually find somebody to like give him the orders to like
Yeah.
yeah. Like,
His old commander came back and walked in civilian clothes and said, "Dude, the war's over.
oh
Like,
my god, could you
lay down
imagine
your gun."
returning back to like even at 70s modern day Japan, like after being on an island since the 40s?
Oh my God,
Like,
yeah,
could you
I know,
just
it's crazy.
walking into Tokyo and all that for like think about like
Yeah,
1940s Japan, just paper and sticks and everything, to like the 70s where
right.
it's like a rising tech power.
Yeah,
Like
I
my
know, it's crazy.
that man probably wanted
Um,
to go back to his cave.
I bet he did.
Like, it's just
I hope his bank account was stacked up by then.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
speaking of the Pacific, I haven't asked you yet, Uncle D, but we do plan on having you back for that because we plan on doing the Pacific.
Okay.
You know, the
Yeah, love to.
follow up to Band of Brothers. So
Okay.
yeah, we would definitely like to talk to you about some of the Japanese stuff.
Sure. No, I'd love to. Yeah, sounds great.
That being said, back to the 101st. What battles or significant things were the 101st particularly involved in with that helped turn out the war the way it did?
I mean, there are some of the key campaigns of in Europe, and so I mean, obviously Normandy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So getting the Allies back on the European continent is huge, right? So that certainly shifts the war once the Western Allies are back in France. Um, then, of course, it turns out to be a failure, but certainly they participate obviously in Market Garden, as you all noted before. Again, that one turns out not to work out as well, but it is a key campaign that does shape some things. The Battle of the Bulge, of course, they're playing a key role there in stopping the German advance and turning that back around. And then from that point on, they're a part of moving into Germany and shutting it down. As the war goes on, as the war ends, right in April and May of 45. So they're really playing an integral role in the war in Europe.
Well, I can't help but ask this because Market Garden has such a negative connotation to us in this room. Um, you said Market Garden played some important roles. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Well, I just think this is one of those things that where you're experimenting with. I mean, I don't know that Market Garden was necessarily a bad idea in theory. But it actually shows poor intelligence work because the Allies didn't realize how strong the German units were that were there, or how many of them were there. So sometimes these things in hindsight look like, this looks like a complete screw up, and it might have been. I mean, I think it generates interesting ideas about what you can do with airborne troops and how they can be used later. Because this is all, if you look at like doctrinal development in the war, you see some of this. Like the Soviets go the other way too, right? So they had abandoned some of this, but they developed what they called like deep battle or deep operations doctrine. That is really a big chunk of that relies on airborne troops and long range artillery and things like that. And they're doing. I'm not saying they were inspired by Market Garden, but it's coming at the same time where a lot of these armies are thinking about these kinds of things. So even though it fails, it is an attempt to think about that in terms of how you can use airborne forces to advance more rapidly and drop them and then try to build a conduit to them, get a unit that pierces the front lines and meets up with them in the rear. Right?
So with Market Garden, I'm going to continue on this for a second, as long as you don't mind.
Sure.
The report they get on the episode, so I mean, obviously, I'm just basing this on the show, is that there's only women, children, and elderly left to defend the places they're going, and for Operation Market Garden. How is your intelligence that bad? That and there's obviously like large regiments of German soldiers there, and obviously push them back. So I mean, it's not just women and children, but a very strong force.
I don't know specifically on Market Garden why they didn't. I'm not sure where that intel is coming from, so I don't know specifically as you say correctly. Why? It seems like a pretty big miss, right?
Mhm.
That you don't see these units because there were quite a few of them there. Um, I don't know if that owes itself to some German deception practices. I don't know, honestly. I'm not, because again, I'm not sure where that intel came from that's telling them that there's not German units there. I mean, again, trying to get intel on from behind enemy lines, admittedly, is a dicey proposition, right? But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I can give you a better answer because I don't know specifically where that intel was supposed to have come. So
Well, there's an episode shortly around this time and that talks about how in Holland they were using children to gather information and bring it back, and then they were reporting it to the Americans. Was that something that was common?
yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know that they're going to send kids on missions, but certainly civilians are doing a lot of stuff and feeding the armies information about what 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 the opponent's doing, right? Especially, people like the Dutch who have no interest in the Germans being there. We're happy to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't know specifically. I don't know that anybody's like trying to use kids, but if kids could walk up and get a candy bar from a soldier and say, "Hey, if they somehow find some information that they could pass on, I'm sure they'd be happy to use it."
Oh yeah.
So,
That reminds me, in the episode we did, Market Garden, or I think it was the next one, Crossroads, they were talking about how they were expecting, old men and children, but it turned out to be like multiple companies of SS. And we had a conversation of how good was the SS, because some of us were like, were they elite troops? Or we thought they were mostly just party loyalists, so would that make them less effective than normal army units? Like, could you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, so I mean, they were envisioned. The SS is, I mean, this was like the Nazi Party's army,
Mhm.
right? And they were actually envisioned as like special, not exactly special forces the way we think of it, but an elite unit. And so you got two different kinds of SS. So what they called the Allgemeine SS, which were more like guard duty and things like that. But the Waffen SS, which is the armed SS, were really good troops. So that's what you get. They were also, they got a bad reputation for not withholding the same ethical standards as some other parts of the German army, although a lot of them have blood on their hands. Um, but yeah, some of them were actually really very well trained, very good troops.
so here's another thing we talked about quite a bit. Was over the course of this show, so many of these guys get wounded and then go AWOL from the hospitals and return to the front line. Was that how difficult was it to go AWOL from a hospital during World War II?
I think it probably wasn't that hard to do. I don't know how many people are actually keeping an eye on you because they got so much going on and
Yeah.
there's so many people coming and going. And apparently that was actually fairly common. The guys would get separated from the units. They didn't like it. It made them very uncomfortable because they felt like they wanted to be back with their comrades, their peers. And so you read that a lot. That guys would go to the hospital and then after a few days would take off and go back to the unit. So
Hmm.
So I'm guessing. I mean, again, I don't know, what the security procedures were in hospitals, but I doubt there was much to them. I think it's doctors and nurses and orderlies and whatnot, and some guy in the middle of the night sneaks off. I doubt there's that many people who are watching. So
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be on the show at least, variances to it. I mean, you see guys that are like in a field hospital 500 yards from the front line, get up and walk to the front line. You think that'd be pretty easy, but like somebody like Popeye in like episode 2 or 3, like crosses half of Europe to get back to easy because he has to get on a plane and he has to hitch a ride with the convoy and like all these things to get back, and that seems like hard, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
I mean, again, I'm guessing he's, the military is still good with this, right? If that you can hop a flight, if they've got space available flights. So he's probably like, hey, I need to get back to my unit. I'm getting out of the hospital. Can you give me a ride? Yeah, sure. Hop on. You can ride in the back. Gets on a plane to wherever. And then, of course, there's still, depending on where you are, there's still some civilian transportation that's still active. And so I'm not saying it would have been easy. Don't get me wrong. But, and again, the farther you got to go, the tougher that gets. But But again, apparently there was a fair number of guys that did it. So
Well, then on like the opposite side of it, and again, I'm springing this on you, but we see in like episode 8 where Webster is returning to the unit after being gone for 4 months because he was wounded, and they all resent him for it. They're all like, everybody else came back a long time ago. Where the hell have you been? And they they don't treat him very well. Have you read anything like that? Is that something that would happen?
yeah, I mean, there's actually a lot more desertion in World War II than is usually noted. We think of, like this is a total war effort and everyone was patriotic. But in any war, there's people who they crack after a while. They can't handle it. Right. Understandably. I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that it happens under the strain. Right. So I think there was something like, my numbers might be off, but it's like 50,000 troops that deserted from the U.S. in World War II. And certainly there's plenty from other sides too. Right. And so you could be trying to remember the number of days you could be gone before you were actually declared AWOL, but it's quite a few. I'm going to say it's like 30 days.
Yeah, it's 30.
Right. So some of these guys would wander off for a few days and know they're in transit somewhere. But to be gone 4 months, now you're in desertion territory. Although I think to be technically a deserter, you have to be tried and convicted of it. So you can't just say somebody.
Maybe I didn't explain myself very well. I don't want to make it sound like Webster was deserting. He went to the hospital and he went through hospital and rehab and everything and didn't report back to the unit for 4 months. They didn't say he was AWOL or deserting. He was just recovering from his wound for 4 months, I guess is a better way to put it.
But so many people had gone AWOL from the hospital to rejoin the unit. They're like, well, this guy, got shot in the shoulder. He was back 3 days later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I'm sure there was probably a fair amount of that too. Again, if it's just as you point out, AJ, if it's that common for people to escape so they can get back to the unit, it might seem odd that this guy stayed for the doctor recommended treatment. He stayed for the whole 4 months.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. But
50,000 deserters though, that's a large number. That took me by surprise.
I don't know. Think of all of Europe and all that. I can see people just like, I'm just going to stay here and start anew. Because like you said, I imagine once the Germans lost, a lot of people took off those uniforms and probably like, oh, this is just where I am now. Like, I'm sure a lot of them tried blending in and like downplaying what they did.
So what do you do when the war ends and these people that have deserted during the war, do they continue to look for them and punish them, or is it just the war is over, so we're just going to forget about it?
I'm not sure how long they would look for people. I mean, they don't have the resources to keep after people for extended periods of time. So I think at some point they're just classified unless they find them inadvertently sometime later on. But I don't know exactly how long they would continue to search before they would call it off. But I mean, I would imagine the person would probably put on a list, and if they show up somewhere in the States or in Europe, then they would flag it, right? Hey, this person's wanted for desertion from pick your army, But I don't know how actively they actually looked for them. So probably not that much.
Fair enough. So in episode 9, we see a little bit of, I guess we'll just call it what it is, stealing. How common was it for U.S. soldiers to for lack of a better term, pillage German homes and businesses while over there?
It's called tactically acquiring.
It's called gear adrift, gear a gift.
Yes, it was quite common. Apparently, it was very common there was an old joke that the Soviets fought for the motherland, the British fought for honor, and the Americans fought for souvenirs.
Yes.
It's exaggerated, of course, but the Americans tended not to steal like super valuable stuff. I think the overwhelming majority of it was they loved battle flags. Just think about what you could find at the gun and dog auction, right? Or some gun show. You'd find old World War II guns because they were allowed to keep those. That was not against regulation, and a lot of flags. So they'd take battle flags, Nazi flags, things like that. So a lot of them came home with stuff like that they just, you're staying in an abandoned house for a couple nights before you move on, and there's stuff in there you need. They grabbed it and took it with them and brought it home. And
So
that's
it's not like what the Nazis did, where they're actually stealing art from countries and stuff like that. Like,
right, exactly. Where you got this like entire cave stocked full of
or like that wall of Russian gold that nobody can find and all. Yeah,
right. Yeah, I mean, there was a few that tried that and a lot of them got arrested and tried for it in the American Army. But yeah, they're not doing that. There's no, as far as I know, there's no massive caves in Germany full of American looted stuff. So.
Like in the episode, Lieutenant Spears is taking silverware and mailing it home to his parents. You know,
it's real silver, really.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, everybody, if you made it through the war with your watch, you were a lucky guy, right? If you ever got captured, that'd be the first thing that they would take. So, and everybody did that, right? So they stole jewelry from soldiers, from POWs, and from people. And I mean, there was a joke among the German POWs that U.S. didn't stand for United States, but it stood for Uhrensammler, which means watch collector.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's even like, who was old boy that had all the watches on his wrist?
Picante had like a whole armful of watches. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, have you ever seen the famous photograph of the Soviet army above the Reichstag in Berlin? And the guys are like standing triumphantly on the edge of the building. Anyway, they had to go back, and this is like 1940s Photoshop, right? They had to go back in and edit out all the watches that were up all these Soviet guys' arms, because they'd been looting for 2 or 3 days before they took the photo. So they actually edited them all out. So each one's got one watch on. In the original photo, there's dozens of them.
Oh, that's pretty. I want it all edited in RAW. Like,
right.
I don't care they took a watch. Like,
it doesn't fit with good Soviet propaganda, though, right?
Yeah, that's all right. They were the first ones to jump out of planes or be pushed out of planes. Like, they could keep a watch. Like,
yeah, push.
They took one for all the military of the world, basically. So I was like, you can keep a watch. Like, Seiko will beat the Swiss in a couple of years anyway. It's fine. Like,
yeah.
Well, I think this show does a wonderful job of showing us the war, the brutality, and like what the 101st went through, but it doesn't really do that at the end. So I guess for us and for the listeners, Uncle D, will you just talk to us about like what the key events were that led to the end of World War II?
Well, again, I mean, on the Western side, of course, once the Allies were back on the European continent, I think that was in the Western Europe, that's obviously the key event, and you can see that in terms of a lot. There's a marked difference, let's say, between the German soldiers that are captured by the Allies pre-Normandy and those that are captured after, and the guys that are captured before. In North Africa and Italy, a lot of these guys are still pretty gung-ho about the German military effort. And after Normandy, most of them are pretty defeatist. They can see the handwriting on the wall. So they knew once the Allies were back on the continent that the war was going to end. And then you pair that with the Eastern side, which again were the Soviets by January of 45 are actually into Germany already, right? And they had already pushed the Germans clear out of the Soviet Union. And if you think that's really saying something, considering how far the Germans advanced into the Soviet Union. I mean, it's like hundreds of miles. It's like 700 or 800 miles that the Germans advanced before they got to. I mean, they were right outside Moscow. They'd encircled Leningrad. They're in Stalingrad, and they got pushed all the way out. So it had gone from this great German Reich to they're getting pushed back to the German border. So I think they're getting squeezed on both sides, and they just don't have anything left to. I mean, Hitler doesn't even actually fully mobilize the German population until like late 44, because he doesn't want to see the same thing happen in World War II that happened in World War I, where the German population was starving and loses some morale at the end. And so, but the Germans just couldn't produce. They can't outproduce the U.S. They can't outproduce the Soviets, and they don't have enough left. So I think they're slowly dying, and they're getting squeezed on both sides. But Normandy, and then again, as we mentioned before, Stalingrad, and then Kursk on the Eastern Front was what turned it around and started squeezing the Germans back in the middle.
Uncle D, have you ever seen the movie Enemy at the Gates?
Yes, I have. The Jude Law.
Yes. At the beginning of that movie, they show a scene where each soldier gets one bullet because they don't have
Right.
enough bullets, and then
Right.
only every other guy gets a gun.
Yeah.
So when the guy in front of you dies, you're supposed to pick up his gun and put your one bullet in it and shoot it. How do you go, if that's true, I don't even know, but how do you go from that to pushing the Germans all the way back into Germany?
Oh, that's a great question. And also, if you look at the casualties that the Soviets lost, like 10 million casualties in the first year and a half of the war. 10 million. Now,
Wow.
a casualty, of course, is not killed; it's just wounded. So some of those guys might be on that list a couple of times, right? But the Soviets also lost total in the war. It's almost half the deaths in World War II were Soviet citizens, military or civilian. They take an absolute schwacking by the Germans, and of course, they also managed to like dismantle factories, put them on trains, and move them a couple hundred miles to the Ural Mountains and reassemble them and start working them again. It's amazing, I guess, what you can do in a dictatorship, right?
Yeah.
But they did some impressive stuff, and it just becomes. I mean, my argument would be, and I think a lot of people would agree, that's the German-Soviet war is probably as close to real total war as what the world has ever seen, because they were willing to. I mean, the Germans were there to just obliterate the Soviet people, and they figured it. And once they figured that out, why would you ever surrender again if you're Soviet?
Yeah, because
And so they just
I
fought
remember
to the
hearing
death.
like stories of Soviet like civilians becoming like great snipers and everything like that. Like, and that's what I always think of when I think of the Soviets in World War II is like just being renowned for the snipers and everything, the sniper combat that you would hear about.
Yeah,
That's what Enemy of the Gates is about, is
Yeah.
a sniper
Well, that's
battle.
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And then they're using women in combat. The
Yeah,
Soviets
like
were on extensive.
one of them was like one of the best marksmen was a female.
And their pilots, they actually called them the night witches or the night bitches, depending on which side you were talking to. But yeah, there were female pilots that bombed the Germans, and the Germans hated them. So, but they were very effective. So anyway, I mean, the thing to note is the Germans. I won't get too deep into this, right? But the Soviets are in their own disarray, right? Because Stalin's purged the Soviet army, and they had just basically the purges had only stopped a couple months prior to the German invasion. So the Soviet army is in complete disarray. None of them want to do anything because they're afraid. They all remember what happened to the last guy that had an original thought, so they're not going to be him. You know, but once Stalin backs off of them and leaves them alone, then they actually had some capable people, and they could produce a lot of stuff. And they could, by 1943, 44, they could pump out 5,000-6,000 tanks a month and planes, and they have some very good tanks and very good planes, and they had the people that were willing to fight. So they just keep throwing divisions in there.
So a free market saved the day.
Yeah.
So you talked about tanks there. I don't ever hear anybody talk about Russian tanks. We always hear, that the German tanks were just so far superior to our own and is in American tanks. Where did the Russian tanks rank in that order?
I've seen people say that the Russian heavy tank, the T-62, is the best tank in the war.
Oh, okay.
It has a bit wider platform than the Panzers, the Tigers. It's like a really big, but it's also maneuverable, and I believe it has a slightly bigger gun. I think the Panzers were known that the Germans had that amazing 88 millimeter gun on their tanks, and the Soviet T-62 has a 92 or 93 millimeter gun. I mean, the Sherman tanks, smaller because they can't fit as many of them on a ship, right? If they build them too big. So the Americans are, in American defense, we're a little handicapped because we got to ship everything overseas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the Soviets, and they had just a really good medium tank, the T-34, that they'd built for years that they could, and they just don't. It's like a different philosophy. Again, not to get too deep in this, right? But the Germans were always like looking for wonder weapons,
Yeah.
V1, V2 rockets. They actually built a jet airplane, the Messerschmitt 262, that they're flying by the end of the war. I mean, they built some really impressive technology, but they can't mass produce that. So, and they have this massive tank called the Elephant that they have at Kursk in 43, but they only had like, I don't know, 30 or 40 of them. The Soviets have like 50,000 T-34s. So bring your 50 tanks on, but if I've got 50,000, smaller tanks, you're just going to get swarmed. And
Well,
so,
and especially from a Russian perspective, you think you would like even you saying like the wider base, like you're gonna build your tank to give you the home field advantage in your terrain. So like you said, like the
Right.
smaller tanks are going to be like less effective in those areas and stuff like that. And then so now you're less maneuverable and you're under firepowered. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I can see that.
Absolutely. And again, that's part of the problem with the American Sherman is because it's smaller, it has to have a smaller gun.
Yeah.
So the Sherman only has like a 75 millimeter gun, which was harder to hit. Again, it's not as devastating as that 88 millimeter or the 90, 91, 92, whatever it was that the T-62 had. So.
Yeah, we had smaller tanks. I noticed as well because I think I heard like one time it's the reason why it's even called a tank is because I guess it was like made in sections and all. Like nobody in these factories in the West really knew what they were making, and they were just told they were making parts for a water tank.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the phrase tank came from and all that. So it's like yeah, you were like about that size is what you're looking at and all. So it's thinking like a bit bigger than a propane tank type thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of them were, the initial. Yeah. That's interesting. So, and later they actually built like a lot of the early World War II tanks were built on tractor chassis.
Yeah,
And so
like,
they start calling them tractors for a while too, because they actually had
well,
the same chassis.
that's your all-terrain vehicle so far. Like, yeah, think
Yeah,
about it. It's like
that's right.
even the cars feel so fairly new and all that. So it's like, what can we go like on anything that isn't a road? It's like, oh, we have tractors. Like,
Right.
so yeah, I
Right.
could see that.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. It's also the way the Germans could build them in the Soviet Union, and they could build the prototypes in Germany and then ship them to the Soviet Union. They just labeled them tractors. That's how they got them across international borders.
Yes,
They're
that's
just sending
sneaky.
tractors to the Soviets for agriculture, right?
It's
So
all about the paperwork. Like,
that's right. That's right. It's all in the packaging, right? So
but yeah, but no, I remember like because you were talking the wonder weapons and all that. Because they even like the Germans even had like a stealth bomber and all that. They never really deployed
yeah,
and all stuff
they were
like that.
developing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, because I remember like we took that from them because there's a huge documentary I once saw to where like they planned on pretty much nuking New York. Like was their plan with the stealth bomber if they when they got it up and running.
Well, you
I
also
mean,
got the Bismarck.
yeah,
I mean, like the giant ship is like the biggest ship ever built at the time or whatever.
yeah,
And
yeah.
there's
And they were on the verge of actually, from what I understand, like real submarines by the end too. Because most of the submarines in World War II were not; they were submersibles, but they couldn't stay down very long because they had to run on battery when they go into the water. But the Germans were actually working on like a nuclear powered submarine, like we have now, that can stay under indefinitely. So they got a lot of stuff. I mean, they're technological. You'd almost call them wizards. They invent lots of cool stuff, but
They
if you're
were
not going to
they
make
were into the
thousands
occult
of
like
them,
yeah.
so
So like, we're talking a lot about Europe and all, but what role did some of the northern African countries really play against the Germans? Because you hear about like the Allies sending people in there, but now that I think about it, I don't really hear much about like say like like those countries like the Egyptian army having anybody that went after them or fighting them or anything like that or any of those countries at the top like what role did those countries really have a play in?
well, of course, that's a whole theater of the war. The Italians had actually invaded Africa, Ethiopia in 1935,
Yeah.
and they were fighting in North Africa. And then the Germans sent troops to try to save the Italians because the Italians were having trouble. And then the British sent troops to, well, the British were fighting the Italians, and then the Americans go later. And so you end up with a whole battle that rages from Egypt across to Tunisia. I don't know how much a lot of that. So some of that territory was French, and so it's like Morocco and Algeria were French territories,
Yeah.
and so they're not. And they technically were allies with the Germans because it's not Free French; it's Vichy French. I mean, there's like South Africa. Anything that's part of the British Empire sent troops to fight. So there's lots of Indians, South Africans. Of course, obviously India is not Africa, but a
But
lot of
yeah, at
people
the
from
time
the
with the
British
British,
Empire.
but I didn't even think of that either and all that. Like I don't think India when I think World War II. Like
Yeah,
so
right.
yeah, that's like I even when we talk like even when we're talking about that side of the world, the Atlantic and all that or the Pacific, like yeah, I think of like even on that side, didn't we ally more with China against the Japanese in that
Hmm.
part?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, the U.S. is allied with
Which is
China,
kind of weird to
and
say out loud. Like
yeah, it seems weird now, right?
yeah.
we were friends with
Geo-
Russia and China.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So, But yeah, a lot of them weren't, at that time, again, I think they'd been either part of the French Empire or British controlled, Italian controlled. So a lot of them don't have big, strong, in Northern Africa, don't have strong armies to contribute. So and the other parts were part of European empires. A lot of them did send troops to fight. So
Yeah, it seems like a pain in the ass place to test out your new tank and all that kind of stuff and all that sand. Like,
Oh
yeah,
God, yeah.
like,
yeah, it'd be rough going, right?
yeah.
So
Well, Ray, you got any questions for Derek?
No, I don't this time around, actually.
All right, fair enough. AJ, you've been fairly quiet. You got anything else?
I don't think so. No.
All right. And Tom, you got any more?
Yeah, like, were there any big Mediterranean sea battles now that I think about it? Like, as you hear about, like I said, the Atlantic, Pacific, and all those, like, well, honestly, whenever I think the Atlantic, I think of the damn Mako sharks. Because I heard so,
yeah,
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 because after the people just be floating, they said you would just see people disappear underwater one at a time. Like, and it
yeah,
was these, like, bluefin Mako sharks that were just eating people for days on end, and you were just, like, floating next to somebody, they were just gone. Like,
yeah.
but yeah, I just don't like. I don't think I have no connection with any type of like naval battle in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, that's a great question too. I'm not sure. I mean, nothing really comes to mind in terms like there's no, I don't think any like large dramatic. I mean, there's obviously fighting going on,
Yeah.
but a lot of it was like operations trying to get to islands and things like that. But
Hmm.
again, even World War II, the Germans still rely a lot of their naval forces. The most effective parts were U-boat campaigns,
Yeah.
and they're not really trying to take the Allies on the surface like the Japanese do in the Pacific. They're not trying to go head to head with them in the same way. At least once the war gets going, I think there's some of that early on, but. So I don't. Yeah, I don't know. To be honest with you, I'm not sure. Nothing comes to mind. I can't like you. I don't think of the Mediterranean as for great naval battles, but I
No,
might be.
because it really just seems like if like after you've taken like France and Spain, why not just take that little strait there and you control the whole thing? Is what I was just thinking.
Yeah,
To where like at
yeah,
that point you have that choke point, like anybody who is in there is trapped. You can either like wait them out with like resources and control shipping, or just you know concentrate your forces there. But yeah, I just didn't know.
yeah. I mean, I know it's one of those things. I mean, I think the Allies had really had dominance there for a while because I know it's one of the big concerns for the Germans and the Italians in North Africa is they had very difficult time supplying them because their forces get hit by Allied forces coming across the Mediterranean
Yeah.
from Italy to North Africa. So, but yeah, again, I don't know specifically of any like major naval engagements there. So,
Eh, they peaked at Sparta. Like,
You good, Tom?
yeah, no, that's I'm tapped out for now. Like, I'll definitely have more though when we kind of like actually watch the Pacific and all that though.
right, yeah, good
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Uncle D, I think that's all the questions we got for you. Do you have anything else you want to talk about real quick?
Well, just I might make one correction. I didn't mean to imply earlier that like if a soldier was missing, that the U.S. wouldn't go looking for them. I was thinking about desertion, like when someone's like if they knew somebody had deserted. Like I said, I didn't think they would expend a lot of energy continuing to look for somebody. I didn't mean to insinuate that like they're not going to like if they don't know what happened to somebody, they do spend a lot of time trying to find them, and we
Mhm.
see that still going on now, right? I mean, they don't want to leave anybody behind, so.
Yeah.
So just want to clarify that. I wasn't trying to insinuate that the U.S. would just let people go and not care what happened to them. That's not true. But
Well, Uncle D, I mean, I'm not trying to misquote or put things out there, but didn't you find a POW a few years back?
so I helped identify one. Yeah,
Mm.
well, he was actually just it was a guy he'd been on a U.S. bomber crew in Germany, and they found the body floating in a lake in Germany, and we had a team investigate it. Anyway, I just put the case forward, and they eventually approved it, and then they went and exhumed the body, and turned out it was the person that we thought it was, and so
Oh wow.
they turned it back over to the family, and he was buried in Florida.
Good deal.
That's cool.
So
Yeah. Well, anyway, I just want to throw that out there. Uncle D doing crazy stuff. Uh,
That's my Indiana Jones phase. Is how I, but without the cool hat and
Yeah,
snakes.
that's what it is. You just need the hat and the whip.
They're in the
That's
whip,
right.
right? Exactly.
Well, Uncle D, we really, really appreciate you coming on. Like I mentioned before, we're going to do Pacific and Masters of the Air, so I would probably like your historical insight on those too. But hey, maybe you can come back and just be a regular bum one of these times and just talk to us about a movie.
Sure, sounds fun. Let's do it.
Yeah.
We could talk Enemy at the Gates. We could all kinds of World War II movies we could watch.
Yeah. Absolutely. You just mentioned the movies we're doing next. We're doing Indiana Jones next.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
and
Shameless plug.
yeah,
I like it.
yes. So like I said, we appreciate Uncle D. It was nice talking to you, and talk to you soon. And we appreciate you tuning in for this historical episode. And thanks for tuning in to Blockbuster Bums.